Is there a specific team, maybe a number of teams, that jump out to you where you're like, hey, on signing day, this team has got to be in the top 5, otherwise we got problems?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost it's got to be the Auburn Tigers. I think that this year is the year that Hugh Freeze and the new staff was looking towards or looking to say, hey, we're here, to kind of announce yourselves in the way that he announced himself in Mississippi when he was at Ole Miss. So I think that if you don't get a top 5 class this year, as close as you are, they're flirting around the top 5, and based on other commitments, they've fluctuated a little bit. But if you get a top 5, that means you landed your quarterback. You get a top 5 class, that means that you probably picked up on one of these big-time receivers that you've been looking at. So let's say how the dominoes fall. If you're able to land a guy like, let's say, Julian Lewis, okay, he's going to help buoy that class to where they kind of pump up into that range. Then you get a guy like, let's say, Caleb Cunningham a few weeks ago said he was Auburn was his #1 school. Right now is hiding heavy with Alabama, but how does that look if Auburn puts together, let's say they're 6-1 around October, November, or they have one of those records where people are starting to turn heads and they got a signature win? Then a lot of these commitments or a lot of these who your leader is now doesn't mean as much when you see Auburn in a light that Auburn hasn't been seen in a long time. Just think about this. This class, the class of 2025, has not seen any of the power Auburn teams since they've been in high school. They don't know Jordan Hare when it's been rocking because you got a top 10 team hosting. Not only a top 10 team coming to town, but a top 10 team hosting. They don't know that, Auburn. So I think that if they can put some wins together on the field, you get a top 5 class, and that's something that you have to do in order to keep the momentum going for Hugh Freeze next year.
Man, I think you brought up a really good point. Like, if they're able to have some success on the field, let's say they pop for a 9-win season, I'm curious to see how much that would translate to how they could close on signing day. I want to get your opinion on this, Dukes. We obviously are aligned of, okay, if Auburn has success on the field, they're probably going to feel pretty good about where they stand on signing day. How much work do they have to do before game 1? Is it a thing where Auburn's going to close late, or is it a situation where you want to build that fortress up as much as possible with as many commitments and as high up in the rankings as possible and hang on until signing day?
I think it's a more of a 75-25 type deal. If I were to put it in percentage points, I think you want to have your class about 75% of who you want in the class with no regard to the transfer portal. We're just talking about high school recruiting. You want to have about 3/4 of your class at least on the hook, if not committed, really hot and heavy with 3/4 of your class. And then that last little bit, that last 25% are the ones where you can go and start to poach other recruiting classes and say, hey, see what those guys are doing down there on the plains? Hey, come be a part of it. And I think as long as you have the majority of your class, you know who it's going to be, you're always going to find those guys who, develop late in their high school careers and become ball players. They become Power 5 SEC type guys. Right now, there are guys committed to Group of 5 schools who are going to be 4-star, at least 4-star guys when it comes to who they end up being in this class. So I think that for sure you got to have at least 3/4 of your class done, and then you have 25% to kind of play around with.
And I know Julian Lewis said he wants to shut down his recruitment before his senior season starts. So a lot of the Auburn fans that are following Hayes Fawcett on Twitter and got the notifications on, like I said, the phone buzzes and they're like checking it. Like, is it the Hayes Fawcett? Is it the Julian Lewis to Auburn? They're waiting for it, brother. They're waiting for it. Who else needs to be in the top 5 on signing day? Dukes, any other teams you're watching closely?
Florida State. Florida State, I think, needs to be in the top 5. They've been so successful with the transfer portal. It's almost like every time they got a guy, he ended up being a guy. You look at the Jared Verses of the world. You look at Keon Coleman. You look at Jordan Travis. You look at guys who started at other places. Johnny Williams. You look at guys who started at other places who really developed and flourished at Florida State. Now we need to see the development part. Losing out on KJ Bolden last year when I thought was huge, because you got to see Florida State continue to get these 5-star guys, because we haven't seen it on a consistent basis without using the portal. So now as Florida State, this is one of those years where you kind of don't know. It's a mixed bag. You've been heavy portal once again. You bring in DJU, but they've been doing so well when it comes to quarterback recruiting. When you think about Luke K, you think about the new 26. I think they got 2 quarterbacks already committed going forward. So I think that is really important for them. If they can get in the top 5 to kind of solidify themselves, especially with everything that's going on in the landscape of college football with the playoffs.
Dukes, let's stay in the state of Florida. Miami and Mario Cristobal have pretty much made their bet on the recruiting trail over the entire time he's been there in Coral Gables. Not necessarily starting super hot right now, at the time of us recording this, at least in this 2025 class. Are they a school that you think will do some work during the season? I mean, how important is it for them to be in that top 5 to really compound the momentum they've had over the course of the last couple cycles?
I think the way Miami recruits in the portal, it may not be as imperative. And the reason I say that is because Miami already has that. They were one of the NIL front runners when you think about when it came to, hey, we're going to be able to pay better, the collective. You're going to get the bag from Miami. And a lot of times you want a guy who has documented production when you're talking about straight up dollar signs. And that's kind of what Miami is. They've always kind of exuded the fast life, the money, the cars. Hey, come to Miami, be a baller, the championships. So I think that when it comes to high school recruiting, Miami's going to get theirs in that talent-rich state, especially in that area. But they don't necessarily have to be a top 5 school based on how well and what they represent in the transfer portal. And I say that conversely with Florida State because that's kind of what Miami presents. I understand I said it differently for Florida State, but I think Miami is a different ball game. I think Florida State really needs to be top 5. And I think Miami, if they're not, it's not as big of a deal because they've been doing pretty well consistently when it comes to high school recruiting.
I'm so curious to see what happens in that state on the field because it feels like to me, if you're able to be the school of choice or have the proof of concept or be the big dog in the state, essentially, if you can be that school of choice for that kind of high school talent in that state, like you're going to have a chance to not just win conference titles, but I mean national championships. It feels like when you look back at, the Alabamas when they had Amari Cooper on that roster and other, it felt like Florida All-Stars on different rosters across national title teams. So that's going to be curious. I'm really intrigued by that plot when it comes to this season in college football. I want to throw a team at you here, Dukes. Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman has been pushing for a top 10 class. He had a top 10 class, I believe it was one of his last 2 seasons, was 11 the year before, or at least his 11 and number 10 class, basically, is what I'll make sure I say. They've been within this top 10 for the majority of this cycle so far. Does he need to be in the top 5 for Notre Dame to eventually close that talent gap and be like a national title contender team? Or are they a team that can also kind of lean on the portal and do what they've done, adding, some key pieces, it seems like, that way as well?
I think Notre Dame they don't have to be in the top 5. And when you look at their average ranking per recruit, they're never, I'm not going to say ever, never. They're going to recruit guys, but I think that Notre Dame recruits with a filter. So you're not able to go get any 5-star. You have to get a 5-star for Notre Dame. You can't just go get any 4-star. You have to get a 4-star for Notre Dame. So that kind of closes the net in which you're able to fish with. Conversely, you think about it now, Notre Dame is Notre Dame for a reason. There are going to be guys who have been Notre Dame fans their whole life. You think about what they represent in the Catholic community. Like Notre Dame is a school that's going to have every opportunity to be a top flight school when you think about how they recruit, who they're bringing in, because they're not just getting guys. They're getting really good guys who want to be at Notre Dame. And I think there's a parallel that we can draw in today's college football world to what Villanova was able to do in basketball when they were winning championships when everybody was a one-and-done guy. They were able to put together a team of guys who wanted to be at Villanova, keep that team together, and as they grew together, they won. I think that's the same thing that's going to happen at Notre Dame. So they don't have to be a top 5 because the landscape at Notre Dame is just a little bit different when it comes to college football. So as long as they hang in that top 10 range, they'll be fine.
Marcus Freeman right now, with what he's done revitalizing that brand since he's been in South Bend, I keep saying it on our show, like it feels like he's making Notre Dame cool again. And that's translating, it feels like, on the recruiting trail. One more team, Dukes, I want to get your opinion on before we move on. Alabama, everyone's question, mine included, when Kalen DeBoer took that job was, okay, he can coach ball, won a lot of ball games. Can he recruit in the SEC? Can he swim with the Sharks? And so far, he is answering before he's even coached a game at Bama, yeah, I can. Does Alabama need to be in the top 5? This is one where I think I would say yes. Am I crazy? Do you agree? What are your thoughts here, Dukes?
I agree. I just think as far as what the naysayers say, coming from cross country, he was at Washington. When you think about Washington, recruiting in Tuscaloosa, Alabama seemed like apples and oranges. Well, he's not pressed. He's not phased. And there's something about when people visit Alabama, they want to commit on the spot. I haven't seen it like this with any other school in this cycle where guys take a visit. Like, usually we're on it. I'm trying to get the guy on the interview before he commits. Hey, you know, I may be in constant communication with the guy, and then he, boom, commits. And he's like, yeah, hey, sorry, dudes, man. I just felt it. It was time to go. So, yeah, I think it's really important because look at where they're starting. You got your quarterback. You've got athletes all over in different positions. Now you just got to close strong. Now you're getting your offensive linemen. It's starting to kind of look like an Alabama class that you don't know who's pulling the strings. Even still, who knows? You can't tell because that's the way that they're recruiting. So big kudos to Kalen, DeBoer, and the Crimson Tide. Big shout out to Courtney Morgan, who's a big part of that operation, and Freddie Roach. I think by keeping the right people in place, I thought keeping Robert Gillespie and Freddie Roach in place was really imperative to keep the ball rolling. And I think if anything else, they're continuing to recruit on the West Coast. And now that's even stronger because you have guys who are already acclimated. So I think that Kalen DeBoer is doing a great job. But with the start that they've had, they do need to finish in the top 5.
And the scary thing, too, if they end up having success on the field and lock up that top 5 class, then I think the rest of college football is like, that was our chance. Saban's gone. That was our one little sliver of daylight to try and get back into this stratosphere where Alabama's human again, and we missed our window. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.